Hello again, World Civilizations class, and today we're going to be talking about the Persian Wars fought between about 490 and 479 BCE between the mighty Persian Empire and the Greeks, which we've been talking about for the last several days. So let's go ahead and get started so I can tell you this wonderful, mesmerizing story, and you can watch the movie 300 with a little knowledge under your belt. What are our goals today? Well, our objectives are to identify the causes and effects of the Persian-Greek Wars, to describe the events that go on in these wars, specifically some of the battles, and to identify the origin of actually the modern marathon race, which may seem completely out of nowhere, but I think it'll make sense when we're done. As far as vocabulary, definitely make sure you have some of these terms and identify these people in your digital notebooks. So where is Persia? Well, Persia is what we might call modern-day Iran, which is a country near the Middle East. It's not an Arab nation, but it's a Persian nation. It's an ethnic group that expanded their empire to actually the largest territory that had ever been seen up until that point. And it remained one of the largest empires ever for quite some time. It was, of course, throughout Iran, but it stretched all the way to India in the east and all the way to Greece, in the west, as well as taking over most of the eastern Mediterranean. Up until this time, we see that the Persian Empire is the largest empire the world had ever seen. Larger than the Chinese empires, larger than the Assyrian Empire. In fact, they took over much of the land the Assyrians had conquered. It was based in what is now Iran, and it had a series of very strong leaders and great armies for a little over 100 years. These leaders were Cyrus and Cambyses, but the two who we're mainly concerned with are Darius I and Xerxes, his son. These were the two leaders who actually invade Greece. In the picture of a relief sculpture in Persepolis in Iran, you see Darius on the throne and Xerxes, his son, accepting tributes. These leaders conquered large territories and even some Greek-speaking places. So when Darius was on the throne, they were basically knocking on Greece's door. So why were they fighting in the first place? Well, the Greeks had been settling on the west coast of Anatolia, which you see on the map. But the Persians had already conquered these colonies, and they actually were raising taxes on the people there. They wanted to get some of the money back. They wanted some of the money back in tribute. Well, the Greeks, by 499, were not happy about this, these Greek-speaking people in Anatolia. And they revolt against Persian rule. They had been used to ruling themselves. Athens, even from Greece, Athens actually sends troops to support the revolt against the Persian Empire. Well, you can understand that might make Darius a little upset. King Darius I of Persia crushes the revolt rather quickly, and he decides that it's not just enough to defeat the Greek-speaking people, but he must punish Athens for helping the colonies. So he then prepares and trains his troops for a few years to be able to send troops to invade Greece, and then eventually do invade at a place called Marathon. So this is the Greek world during the Persian Wars. You see the Persian Empire there in orange. You see Greek opponents of Persia in blue. Some Greek city-states and territories which really aren't taking a role in this fight. So basically we have this darker blue area, not the water, versus this orange Persian Empire. And you can see over the course all the arrows and lines. Those are the directions of attack over the course of these two separate Persian wars. So this first Persian war, Darius invades, and we're going to have a major battle at Marathon. First, the Persians burn a city very close to Athens itself. And the Athenians then run to the Spartans for help. They actually ask them for help, but it's going to take about 10 days for the Spartans because they have to wait for the end of a religious festival. Well, the Athenians, not having the superpower, the military superpower of Sparta, decide to take on the Persians themselves at the Battle of Marathon. And even though some estimates say that there were up to 200,000 Persians, historians really believe it was around 25,000 in this first battle. There were only 10,000 Athenian troops though. But as we know, Athenians had, or Greeks themselves had a very interesting fighting method of fighting. They used hoplites, which are these soldiers who didn't carry much on them so that they could maneuver easily. And they used a phalanx formation, which you see there in the bottom right of your screen, a very tight formation that enabled them to fight against their enemies. Against the Persians, it was very successful. According to historians, 192 Greeks died, while 6,400 Persians died. Those are pretty good numbers for the Athenians. The Persians are so devastated by this that they actually retreat to Asia. The Spartans, as soon as their festival is over, marched to Marathon to try to join in the battle, but they were too late, actually, because the Athenians had destroyed the Persians so quickly. This won't be the end of Persian-Greek warfare, though, because Xerxes, the son of Darius, is going to want revenge. So what about this modern connection? You heard the term marathon or Battle of Marathon. Well, the modern marathon race, which is run all over the world, is about 26.2 miles long. It's the same distance, just about the same distance, as from Marathon to the city of Athens. And legend has it that a guy named Phidippides ran the distance from the battle at Marathon back to Athens without stopping, just to report that the Athenians had won. And when he arrived, he collapsed and died. The strain was that much. Well, nowadays, 26.2 miles is something that most people can train for. But at the time, it was considered such a long distance to run without stopping. So I told you the Persians were going to return, and they do. Darius' son Xerxes vows revenge on the Greeks for this defeat of his father. And in 480 BC, he brings around between 100,000 and 300,000 troops to Greece to invade. This number is much more accurate than in the first estimate. There are going to be 3 major battles fought, along with several other ones. But the battles at Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea are the ones that we're going to talk about. So Thermopylae is the battle where we think of the 300, the Spartans holding off the Persians. But it was actually a coalition of about 3,300 Greeks, led by the Spartans. And what they did was they tried to take these Persians in a narrow pass, so they didn't have to face the entire Persian army at once. They wanted to face a few at a time, a few at a time, and a few at a time. But a traitor tells the Persians another way around, and they basically outflank the Spartans and the Greeks. Most of the Greeks retreat, but it's about 300 Spartans that stand strong and actually fight to the death. Remember, in Sparta, it is glorious to die in battle. That's one way you get a name on a tombstone. Spoiler alert, they all die. Back to it, had to close my door. So these other 2 battles, Salamis and Plataea, we have first the Battle of Salamis, which is basically a naval battle. Athens is evacuated, and the battle is fought at sea because the Athenians have a very powerful navy. They have these new ships called triremes, and they were very fast and maneuverable. And they were able, actually, to surprise the Persians by making them think they were retreating, and then they rammed Persian ships and actually sunk about 1/3 of them. And the Persians were in disarray before they realized what was going on. In the Battle of Plataea, while the Athenians were crushing the Persians at sea, Spartans were on the plains of Plataea, and they crushed the rest of the Persian army, forcing Xerxes and the Persians to retreat back to Anatolia. So what are the effects of these wars? The Greeks win the first one, the Persians come back and they fight again. Of course, the Greeks are worried that the Persians might come a third time. And these victories create a sense of unity in the Greek world. So what we have here is the beginning of an alliance. Athens is going to gain control of what's left of Greece, and they're going to gain leadership of an alliance called the Delian League. And the Delian League was this alliance of ancient Greek city-states dominated by Athens, which is going to unify against the Persians. It's sometimes called the Athenian Empire. Sparta and some other city-states are going to really resent Athens' leadership, which will lead to some wars that we'll talk about next week. So how did the Greeks do it? How did these smaller fighting units really defeat this mighty Persian army, which had spread their military from India to Greece? Well, three main reasons. First of all, the inherent advantages of a defender. Basically, we can think of this as home field advantage. The Greeks knew the lay of the land, they were already there, they were prepared for it, and the Persians were not necessarily used to fighting off of their land. Secondly, better soldiers. The use of hoplites and the phalanx of the Greeks decimated the Persians. And lastly, the element of surprise. The Greeks were constantly surprising the Persians. Nobody thought the Athenians would attack the Persians in the first Persian War, and the second time around they surprised them on the sea and on the plains of Greece. That's it. That's the Persian Wars. The Greeks win twice in a row, defeating Darius, embarrassing Xerxes, and forcing the Persians back. However, this is not going to be end of warfare in Greece, as the Greeks will eventually turn on each other. But that's a video for another day. Have a wonderful night. Make sure that you complete your assignments that go along with this, and make sure that you get your vocabulary in your notebook. Have a good night.